Welcome to this sixth final segment in our series on fighting disinformation, building your online news media skills. Here in the final video, we're going to talk about mindfulness, which is a form of metacognition. A basic way to talk about this is we're going to talk about calm, detached awareness. Here's what we'll be covering in this final video. What mindfulness means, how to be mindful when reading the news, when and how to read news more slowly, which is key, and the importance of the capabilities of developing humility and empathy. I'm going to start with a small story. So, about a year or so ago, I was reading my Twitter feed and I saw somebody posted a quote from Donald Trump. It said, "Never admit defeat." It was supposedly from this book, Trump, The Art of the Deal. You win. If you don't win, claim they cheated, they rigged it, they stole it. I was not too surprised, but also quite disturbed and shocked, even in a way that he would be so blatant. So I put it up on Facebook. I said, "Can you believe this?" All of a sudden, I thought to myself, was I really doing that carefully? I did a quick check online using that lateral reading technique that we talked before, check what other sources have said and checked it out. And it turned out to be totally false. I took it off Facebook really fast and whew, glad I checked. So what happened? I was really not being mindful about that whole process. So what exactly is mindfulness? Now, this is not a course in mindfulness, obviously, but we can say it's a kind of a habit of mind. It's a habit of mind where you are maintaining a calm focus and attention. You're present to where you are at the moment. And you're not reacting or judging what you're experiencing, at least not yet. You're present. And you're also using deep, slow breathing to maintain that mindfulness and manage your distractions. Okay, so why is this important? How does it apply to reading the news? So it also helps us avoid instantly reacting angrily and fearfully or other negative emotions right away, which can be problematic, which we'll talk about. And you saw what happened when I did. It also helps you avoid missing context and the subtleties of issues. So much of our information on online media today is fast graphics, short TikTok videos, things that catch our attention, but you don't really understand what's going on, especially if it's a complicated topic. So it helps us focus really and dig more a little bit, and helps us avoid getting emotionally triggered. Now, of course, emotions are a good thing. It makes life fun and interesting, and it leads to change, personal change or social change, but you don't want to be triggered against your own interests. And that's what happened to me in my little story. So specifically what happened, why I was triggered. First of all, I was in a hurry, and as I do too often, read things too fast and just skim the headlines, boop, boop, boop. And I was already internally primed to believe that statement, something that's called motivated reasoning. And this motivated reasoning, you have to be particularly careful if you're reading or viewing something that relates to your values, politics, cultural issues, or your own identity. And speaking of what leads us to believe something, there are various psychological factors that influence what we come to believe. That's very important to be aware of. Something, first of all, called just repetition. The more you hear something, you're more likely to believe it's true. Why is that? Well, psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who wrote the really interesting book, Thinking Fast and Slow, says it's because familiarity is not easily distinguished from trust or belief. There's also something called anchoring bias. An anchoring bias is where what we hear first has the greatest influence on us. It sticks with us, actually, and what we're most likely to continue to believe. And a related phenomena is perseverance of belief. And that's basically once we do have a belief about something, it's really, really hard for us to give it up and to dislodge it, even if we're presented hard, compelling evidence to the contrary. There's one other powerful force here that's relevant that I should mention, and that's when we share information online. Why do we do it? Well, really interesting. Professor Judith Donath from MIT said it really is a social bonding exercise. It's a way we connect with other people. And not just that, here's her quote directly. In the world of social media, of Facebook and Twitter, news is shared not just to inform or even to persuade. It is used as a marker of identity, a way to proclaim your affinity with a particular community. So it's a real identity development and confirmation or affirmation exercise. So, we might even guess or speculate this is something that maybe even hardwired to us, a survival in terms of connection to our group. Who knows? But it's very powerful. So, really, we've got these forces here that are leading us potentially to the wrong direction. And we've also got those forces that we talked about in the earlier videos about what leads us astray. So, we almost have a perfect kind of brew that can lead us astray. We've got here, we've just talked about motivated reasoning, scanning and skimming headlines, those psychological triggers, how we want to share to affirm our identity, how repetition causes us to believe something. And then also, as we've talked about earlier, we have malevolent entities whose interests are not yours to post something to actually act against your interests. We've got the algorithms that are problematic, can be biased and show you things that are not really for your own good after a while. We've got ourselves in filter bubbles where we only see that information. We have to deal with clickbait and the attention economy, and all that together creates a pretty nasty brew of disinformation. So, what are some specific mindfulness strategies that you can take? Let's talk about that. So, the primary one would be slowing down. That relates to taking pauses. And we'll also talk a little bit about the value of practicing empathy and humility. Now, when we talk about slowing down, we'll talk a little more about that in a second. Obviously, if you're walking to class and you're getting texts on your phone or you're browsing some of your Apple News alerts or whatever it might be, you're not, practically speaking, going to sit down and slowly review all this. We'll talk in a minute about that. But there are certain circumstances, at least, where you need to be very mindful about slowing down and doing what's called close reading. So, first of all, where it really matters to do this quite a bit, certain circumstances. So, obviously, if you have an important school or work assignment, that's very important. For topics that you are motivated to learn more about, something you really want to learn deeply, slow down, okay? And similarly, to deepen your understanding of a topic, to really get the subtleties and the things that may not be obvious, all right? So, but in your day-to-day news online, where you're getting all these bursts of images and bits of data, so forth, how can you at least somewhat slow down and be mindful? Let's talk about a couple of techniques. So one strategy that's been shown to work well is what's called adding friction, which forces us to go slowly, all right, and like a speed bump, all right. So it forces us to slow down a little bit. And sometimes it's done for us. Now, some social media platforms like Twitter will actually put a note in saying, slow down a second. So here's an example of one where Donald Trump talked about the election being stolen. So Twitter added, this claim about election fraud is disputed. And what that just does, it redirects your attention for a second. It says, wait, stop before believing or sharing. That is important, that alone. And that's being done externally, though. How can you add your own speed bumps? Can you do this? So I want to talk a little bit about some advice from a Buddhist monk. Her name is Pema Chodron. She's with the Gampo Abbey in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And this is a picture of her residence. And she advises in her book called Taking the Leap that we integrate more pauses into our life. Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. So pausing, she wrote, creates a momentary contrast between being completely self-absorbed and being aware and present. You just stop for a few seconds, breathe deeply, and move on. I highly recommend her book, Taking the Leap, Freeing Ourselves from Old Habits and Fears. Now, she was applying that to our day-to-day life, which is great. You can also apply this to how and when you read the news. Finally, there are two other internal practices, we might call them, that are worth building here and talking about. I had the opportunity to do an email interview with a media scholar well known in the field. Her name is Dana Boyd. She also talks about the value of empathy. Empathy, she says, helps us realize that there are different legitimate ways of seeing the world. Empathy requires developing a strong sense of how others think and where the differences in perspectives lie. The goal is to understand the multiple ways of making sense of the world and use that to interpret media. Okay, so how do you develop that? Dana Boyd says empathy comes when people are placed in situations where they have to bond and develop trust. Very interesting. Finally, one more practice, just humility. All right. Can you consider you might sometimes be wrong? This is hard, obviously, but everybody thinks that they're right, of course. But you probably are right most of the time. But when was the last time you changed your mind? Something to reflect on a little bit. So I'll close with that. And at this point, I'll also say thank you very much for participating in this series. I hope that you continue building lifelong critical thinking habits of mind. It's really a lifelong journey. Please consider the reflection and practical exercises that accompany this video. And please, if you have questions, comments, something you think should be added to this series, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me right in my email at the new school below. And with that, I'll close and thank you. And I appreciate your time for listening and watching this. And best of luck to everybody.